Stand for the pledge. I said the flag is the United States of America.
One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Village of New Paltz humbly acknowledges that we are on the traditional lands of the Munsee, Esopus, and Lenape people. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced the people to relocate to inhospitable territory far from the bountiful valley and mountains we inhabit today. The village further acknowledges that most of the physical structure of our village and town was built by enslaved Africans who labored as the property of their owners until 1827 on this very land. We acknowledge and honor the contributions, resilience, and accomplishments of the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, and people of color who have overcome historic injustice to inform our past and inspire our future. The Village of New Paltz encourages everyone to learn more about the contributions and sacrifices made by the Indigenous people and enslaved Africans by visiting these sites. If you have any resources that you believe should be included here, please contact us. Thank you.
Okay, amendments to the two agendas. So for the consent agenda, I'm going to add two items. Item number 4, approval of an event by Schwangong Runners on August 8th. Item number 5, reappointment of Dennis Young to the Ethics Board with a 3-year term beginning June of 2025 and ending June of 2028. Within the business agenda, I would like to add, item number 5. It's a letter of support for a grant application that Upper is going to submit, and quick discussion about the CCA in number 6. Item number 7, invitation to bid. Like if you have a sewer construction company, we'd want you to bid on these projects. Item number 8 is a request from a property owner regarding the water bill. And that is it as far as amendments to both the consent and business agenda. I move that we accept the consent agenda as amended. All in favor? I move that we accept the business agenda. All in favor? Aye. And let's go ahead to announcements. Anyone from the village board have announcement that they would like to share with the public?
I do not.
Great. Let's jump right in. Item number 1 on this business agenda is a presentation about greenhouse gas inventory.
Do you have public comment? No, there is a.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Anyone from the public interested in making a public comment on any topic? We don't have a public hearing because we closed our public hearing on
Correct.
design review board at the last meeting, but if anyone was here wanting to make a public comment, you can let us know. Even later in the meeting, fine. So then let's go ahead and hear from our colleagues regarding the greenhouse gas inventory. You guys want to come up to the table?
Sure.
There's chairs there too, if you want to sit.
When you guys, I'm trying to angle the screen for the public, can you guys see it over there too?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
You want to just state your names and your variations for the record, so it's all clear. I know who you guys are, but
I'm Izzy DeFino, part of New Paltz Climate Smart Task Force.
Yvonne Posey, coordinator for New Paltz.
Jolanda, town of New Paltz and member of the Climate Smart Task Force and system scientist for System Dynamics, environmental and natural resource special interest group.
and you're also on the school board facilities.
I'm on the school board facilities.
Floor is yours.
You need,
We should have brought.
You can just tell me when you want me to advance slides and I have your presentation up here. Is that the correct one?
That is the correct one. I'm just figured it'd be easier if I could read it from the. agree with that.
do that too. We can do both. This
Congratulations.
way the public
Oh.
can see it all. Yeah.
Do you want to use my laptop?
Okay, can I?
Yeah.
Okay.
sure.
Yvonne, I think I can pull it up
Oh,
quick, because I'll have the slides, that you emailed us.
So I can just share a little background, right? So it was in 2017, that's when we initially worked on a greenhouse gas inventory. Because that's what's interesting, is we're comparing a few years ago to
right,
what we've been doing more recently to see, where we've seen improvements, where we've seen instances where we're using more energy.
I believe it was more 2019.
So normally it's a 2-year delay. right?
Okay.
We Inventory 2017, but we were performing the work in 2019, because that's how long it takes to get some of the state data. Government operations offices much sooner.
Well, no, not really, because the EPA data from the E-grid has a 2-year lag. So next slide. That's why.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, just to credit, the people who really helped us with the inventory for the village. Mayor Rogers and Heather Nielsen in the Department of Public Works here, and from the Hudson Valley Regional Council, it was, Melanie Patapis, who is not there anymore, but I started working with her early on, and Madison Hodges from our local, ICLEI representative, which is the organization that, it's an international organization that monitors different communities and provides support for, addressing climate change. Next slide. This is just to familiarize people with what we're looking at. The EPA has this E-grid database where they look at the makeup regionally of the electric grids all over the country. And they try to map the emissions that are produced by the local E-grid by regions. And we are in what's called the NIUP region, or NYUP region for upstate New York. And they assign numbers based on the makeup of the sources of the energy for the grid. Next slide. And you see circled in red there where they map out different areas all over the country. And again, we're in the NIUP region. And so the emissions from our electric grid are relatively low compared to the rest of the country at 241.7. We use that number, which is a composite of calculations from CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, to calculate the CO2 emissions equivalent for the electricity that we use. And those numbers tend to decrease by the year.
Why do you think we're emitting less relative to other communities in the country?
Because when you look at the makeup of the E-grid, our combination of energy sources have relatively low emissions. So about 75% of those emissions are made up by hydropower and nuclear, which not exactly clean, but low emission.
And we don't do much coal, is that
We have no coal.
right?
Yeah,
And no natural gas generators, which are located downstate. They have a good number of natural gas electric generation capabilities, which is being phased out.
so if you look at Long Island, for instance, or New York City and Westchester, you see their emissions are way up there. And that's because they're predominantly run off of natural gas. Next slide. So we're gonna present the village first and then the community, the village local government operations, greenhouse gas emissions report, and then the village community greenhouse gases report. So beginning with inventory results and conclusions, we use ICLEI as a software, ICLEI ClearPath as our software for doing the calculations and building our spreadsheets. And when you look at, they divide it into different sectors, and those sectors are for buildings and facilities, water and wastewater, streetlights and traffic signals, and vehicle fleet. And you can see by the pie chart and by the data underneath the pie chart that water and wastewater is by far our largest source of emissions. Followed by vehicle fleet and then buildings and facilities. No, stay there for a minute. So there was a negligible overall increase from 2017 to 2023 in our usage of energy, like 1%, very little. And everything else decreased in energy usage and emissions. And streetlights showed the most significant decrease. So we went to LED streetlights, and you can see that we went from like 43 metric tons of greenhouse of CO2 emissions to 1 metric ton. That was a big decrease.
So, but that's different than costs, right?
Right,
Because the cost.
the
like-
cost of everything.
No, but my understanding too is that like that 2017 cost was actually a function of our bill from Central Hudson, whereas that 2023 cost is because we've actually moved everything off of our. Like, we don't get an electric bill from Central Hudson anymore.
Right.
We're basically in an agreement with NYPA.
Mhm.
So we're paying a lot more than 673 for those lights, but I guess what's significant is in terms of the emissions,
Mhm.
that's improved dramatically.
So the costs, by the way, do not include the distribution, the delivery charge.
Okay.
So overall, we did have a decrease of 17%.
I thought our water plant costs, oh, so is that a little bit different? Because I thought our water plant costs more than doubled, but our sewer plant costs has stayed the same. Because we got the new, like, super robust filtration system at the water plant.
The water plant costs for water treatment increased significantly.
A lot, yeah, because we have a new Bentley of water filtration systems.
And the wastewater plant costs, I believe they increased also. But not like the,
That may have actually gone down just because we use less water, so we have less water going through the sewer plant.
no, it increased also. The wastewater did increase. The usage didn't change that. Well, the usage went down actually, but the cost did increase.
But you also have details on kilowatt hours in addition to dollars too, because
Yeah.
when you and I met, that's what we were focused on, is the kilowatt hour.
Right, I have both.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Next
Next
slide.
slide. So this is just another demonstration chart wise, and you can see that the wastewater and water treatment, wastewater and water system, the whole system had a modest increase and everything else pretty much decreased, but the most significant decrease was with the streetlights. And there was an overall decrease in emissions. Next slide. So when you break it down by fuel usage, you can see by energy usage, I should say, you can see, heating oil or fuel oil made up the biggest, source for emissions, and most of that was due to the wastewater treatment plant again. I could give you the breakdown in terms of the water and wastewater treatment.
Sure.
So the fuel usage was the biggest chunk as far as the emissions. And, it's about 126 in, CO2 emissions from the wastewater treatment, and 60, no, I'm looking at the wrong column. This, 99, I should say, emissions from the wastewater, and 116 from the water treatment plant in terms of emissions. So again, it's the water treatment plant that is contributing most to the emissions. Fuel oil usage decreased, but the cost increased, like most things. The electricity was the second largest source of emissions in terms of the energy type, for both years. The electricity usage actually did not change. But the emissions decreased because the emission factors from the grid decreased. And then that's the only place where we actually saw a cost decrease. Gasoline usage decreased, but the cost increased. We see that increased by 9%, but the cost increased by 45%. And diesel decreased also. That's where you had the biggest decrease, but the cost increased by 3%. And probably most of that is coming from the DPW, a little bit from the firehouse.
You don't have propane on this chart, right? Because we didn't use propane in 17,
No, there was no propane.
but now we use propane.
You do?
Yes, because so
Where?
we use propane in the pole barn down at the DPW garage. So that used to be a totally uninsulated pole barn, and it used a ton of electricity because we used to have to keep the diesel motors plugged in the winter. So then we actually invested in insulating the pole barn so that we could afford to not do that. But then we need some sort of source of heat, so it's cheaper to use propane to heat the insulated pole barn.
That begs an interesting question about directionally, right? Is that in the right direction or not? It might be the most economic direction, correct? Economic direction.
Well, I don't think we're using a significant amount of propane
The
either.
question is still fair.
100%, it's right, and it's an interesting nuance too,
Yeah.
because I think what's interesting about this government work is it's all about like different dominoes have to fall, like the reason that we insulated the pole barn is so that we could temporarily store fire trucks when we eliminated storing fire trucks up at the Henry W property when the new station was under construction.
That was 2 years.
Yeah, so for 2 years, we kept the fire trucks down in the pole barn because we needed it in a more insulated building.
Okay.
Necessity and reality is sometimes cause us to.
And then our thinking was, it was worth it from an investment perspective, because then we would end up with an insulated pole barn. But now we're heating it with propane.
We're gonna come full circle to the question of what's the right answer.
So you had a 90% decrease in your electricity usage there because of the insulation.
Yeah, because
But
we
you
weren't
increased.
heating motors
Yeah.
with a plug.
You increased your emissions because now you have propane.
Lots of moving targets.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide. So again, this is another, just another way of looking at it with the totals included. We're showing that we have the largest emissions from fuel oil, and second is electricity. And there wasn't a whole lot of change between 2017 and now, I mean, 2023 in terms of the fuel oil emissions.
Yeah, that makes sense, right, in terms of.
Mhm. Yes, so looking at costs. Overall, you had an increase in costs of about $13,000, which over 5 years is not terrible. Most of that was due to the decrease in your electricity usage. I mean, not decrease in electricity usage, and the better pricing actually is what caused that, because your usage actually stayed the same. And then you had increased costs everywhere else. Mostly the decrease.
I think one of my favorite things that we identified when you and I were looking at the numbers too, is that, so we have these different users of electricity. And the aqueduct pump station is a really interesting one, because we'll use a lot more energy pumping water from the aqueduct up to the treatment plant property during dry years. So if we have a rainy year, that aqueduct pump station is not using that much electricity. So that's another like interesting like push and pull, and we saw it in numbers, like
Yeah,
when we are sourcing a ton of water locally, that electricity bill goes down. When it's dry and we have to buy water from New York City, that electricity bill goes up.
Seasonality and the average daily temperature and rainfall all factors into the emissions.
it would be interesting to look at that then compared to the rainy days.
Yeah.
Year by year.
Yeah, so that's why, so like, I've asked John, our water and sewer guy, who maintains a bunch of data, to now also keep track of data at the, so we don't have to chase it down, as, the exercise that you just performed. They'll, collect the electric bills for the water plant, sewer plant, aqueduct pump station, and the pole barn, because that's the new favorite. I think there was at least one other, but I can't remember.
2024 summer was very dry, so I would imagine it was quite a bit.
Yeah, that's what we saw. It was like, if it's dry, you use a lot more electricity.
Averaged over the 5 years between 2017 and 2023. That's.
Well, that's also a function of the fact that we repair leaks in the system, in the conveyance system, so there's less demand for water.
Oh, okay. Next slide. So in conclusion, the total greenhouse gas emissions did decrease to 383 metric tons of CO2 equivalent in 2023 against 2017, in which we used 463 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. That represented a 7% decrease in overall emissions. Now, I put a note on this because the initial greenhouse gas inventory had you at 395. And the reason was that they did not count electricity. And we factored that back in and recalculated the emissions. It was in the community report that way, but it was not in the village report. The largest energy source for greenhouse gas emissions came from fuel oil. And this was mainly due to the water and wastewater sector. Electricity was the second largest source. And again, mainly from the water and wastewater sector for both years. And more specifically, these emissions came primarily from the water treatment plant on Mountain West Road. The difference in total electricity usage was negligible between 2017 and 2023. You can see that they're both 957,000 and they differ by very little. However, the emissions decreased by 31%, and that was mainly due to the emission factors. That is, the grid became more efficient. And it went from a factor of 274.9 pounds per megawatt hour, I should say, to 241.7 pounds per megawatt hour. Cost increase for every energy source except electricity and for every reporting sector except streetlights. And the greatest cost increase again for the water and wastewater sector, more specifically Mountain West water treatment plant. And the greatest decrease was due to the change to 100% LED streetlights, where that decrease was 99%. And you didn't believe that when I told you that the first time. You thought maybe there was some other error or something else there, but I couldn't find it.
I think because I think what you explained earlier, it makes sense. Because the LED is that much more energy efficient, but we still spend a significant amount of money having streetlights. I mean, that was always the challenge with Central Hudson, is that the cost of electricity for streetlights is peanuts. It's really the fact that we were leasing the lights, and now we own the lights, so now we're paying back the fact that we bought the lights to NIPA, so.
So the overall increase in expenses between 2017 and 2023 was $13,161, which was a 7% increase, which for municipality over 5 years, that's probably pretty good, I would say. We need an additional 23% or 106 metric tons of CO2 equivalent in emission reductions to meet the most immediate target, which is 40% increase by 2030, according to the CLCPA. Using 2017 as a baseline. Now, they use 1990 as a baseline, but we don't have any data to go back that far, so. Okay. Next slide. So I just put this here. This is a good red sheet with some of the columns were reduced, but I outlined the part in red so you can see exactly where the greatest emissions are. And again, look at that water and wastewater treatment segment, because that's probably what we need to target in terms of trying to reduce our emissions by 106 metric tons. Because we aren't going to get it. When you look at buildings and facilities, the village hall uses about 30 metric tons. And remember, we need 106. The firehouse uses 11. The DPW garage uses 19, but the big numbers, your wastewater treatment uses 99. Your water treatment plant uses 116 rather. If you change everything, so total electricity emissions is 105. So if we can eliminate all electric usage, you can get there. But that means, I don't know how you would get to that.
You generate yourself,
Except to generate your own everywhere.
Well, I think what's interesting about like the push and pull stuff, right? Like, what we identified when we looked at the change in terms of electricity consumption up at the water plant, because now we have, that higher end filtration system, which does a fantastic job of removing turbidity and other contaminants. But it just uses 2.5 times the electricity that the older, less efficient or less effective plant used. And now every time we look at updating the 30-year-old sewer plant, all the new technologies all use more electricity. And that will also, whatever we decide to do at the sewer plant will also be a function of what the regulators are requiring us to do, because we are anticipating that there are going to be new stricter standards regarding ammonia and phosphorus. So anytime we're doing something that requires a different level of contaminant removal, it's gonna probably require a more advanced filtration system.
which we village dwellers appreciate, but are there any places where fuel usage, what do you use the fuel? Where's fuel used
To run the plants.
to run the plants? Is that, I don't
Well,
know.
there, fuel,
I don't know how
there's definitely like oil being used to maintain temperature at both the water plant and the sewer plant, because it's an indoor facility.
Mhm.
But electricity is really, that's where we're seeing the. That's
Actually, the biggest use is the fuel oil. If you
at
look at it,
the water plant and the sewer plant.
it's, that's 151 together, those, few things. 151 of your things. So if you can reduce that anywhere, I mean, if you could change it to electricity.
We've been up to the water plant with Brick Alfondre and tried to see, is there a way to like use mini splits or, it's a giant building.
Right,
How do you heat a giant building?
maybe a more efficient way to do it is drawn source.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But if it's just,
I mean, we can circle back with, like.
yeah, just that is, like I said, it's 150 metric tons of CO2.
Yeah.
What's the square footage of the building?
Big and super high ceilings,
10,000 or something, I don't know.
Your diesel usage and taking into account the backup generator, powerhouse testing per week.
We didn't, that was on natural gas.
Okay.
The backup generators, and it calculated out to zero. Just,
Right, it's only on for.
Yeah.
just to make sure it works.
yeah, it was not even, we're putting that on the.
Sure.
I think the original design called for diesel.
That's right.
And Russell's.
Yeah. And then,
I was thinking too, with the pole barn, if you have any idea how many gallons of propane, I might better give like a rough estimate of amount of emissions. Any idea, like annually, how much?
I don't, we can get the propane bills.
Great,
Does Heather-
we can give you that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's kind of the propane bills.
So it might not be a huge amount.
Yeah.
I mean, still, I'm not advocating for
Well,
it, but
no, it's gonna add to the emissions.
it's, yeah, certainly will.
I mean, the problem with garages is they're just
Leaky.
ridiculous to maintain buildings. You're opening
Why you gotta
the doors all the time.
Yeah.
One of the big technological changes for heat pumps is the use of air to water. And by using a different refrigerant, they can have water temperatures of 180 degrees, making it much more suitable for baseboard kind of heating. So where you have those large spaces where heating is the predominant thing you're doing, the investigation of air to water heat pumps would be a good close look, worthy of a good close look. These are newer technologies, they're beginning to be deployed. So that.
If you wanna help us, investigate some of this stuff,
Sure.
that'd be fantastic.
Sure.
it's like glycol.
No, it's not glycol. It's actually, the refrigerant is actually propane. And it allows you to produce a higher temperature output.
Right.
Today, if you use, I have an air to water heat pump. But it only produces 130 Fahrenheit water, which is great for radiant heat. It's not great for thin baseboards.
What is nitrous oxide used for? What applications is that?
It's a byproduct of burning most fossil fuels as well as methane.
Next slide. So village.
Okay, so keep two things in mind. 383 was the government operations for the village. And the process, the methodology is a bottoms up, right? We're looking at the actual bills, the actual usage. When we do the village community, we do a tops-down approach. We're using data from multiple sources. And in some cases, we have to allocate to the village because it doesn't go down far enough. The data sources don't say exactly what the village or the town is using. You might get it to Ulster County. And so you then have to allocate from Ulster County. It really depends on the data source. So community is a tops-down methodology. When you think about 383, next page, please. The community is 23,700. That's the sum of this pie. So it's a much different number. In fact, government operations is about 1.5%. So we might ask, well, why do we focus on government operations? It's because you set the example for everybody. So, and you have better control over it. We have less control over what everybody in the community is going to do because it's not all regulated. So if we look at the community, village community, based on the borders of the village, interestingly, in this analysis, it turns out that normally you would look, say, what's going to be transportation. This analysis did not identify transportation as the largest sector. It actually identified commercial as the largest sector, and that's because there's a lot of natural gas being used. So natural gas for commercial is a predominant source of emissions in total, because you also, in commercial, you also have electric and propane and fuel oil and natural gas. But in total, the commercial sector is 12,733 metric tons, or 63%. I think that's 63.
53. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. 53%, so half of the emissions to the village is coming from the commercial sector. Another 24% is coming from residential sector, which is predominantly heating. And electric usage as well for residential. And then for transportation, it's 16.8% or 39, just under 4,000 metric tons. The methodology, there aren't a lot of roads in the village. It's about 3 miles of roads in total. And the town has 11.5 miles of road. So basically, the village gets 3/15 of the vehicle miles traveled, because that's an apportionment. And that's why you end up with a relatively small piece of transportation emissions. There's no way to factor in the walkability, right? Because that's an allocation from a tops down number. But the methodology says it's really residential and commercial where we do need to continue to focus. That doesn't mean we don't have to focus on transportation, just means that we have other sectors. The town has a lot more emissions from transportation because of total road mileage in the town. Next page, please.
Joe, I'm surprised you don't, so if you're doing 3/15 in the village, I mean, isn't the average speed of vehicles in the village probably half of?
Speed doesn't really have too much of a factor. When you burn a gallon of gas, it's really the miles per gallon that matter the most.
Okay.
So you
Right, so
may
it's already-
get a slight difference in the miles per gallon if you're going slow. I don't know what's more efficient, going slower or going faster in terms of miles per gallon, but it's not too much of a variable because the change in miles per gallon isn't that great.
It's already in there now.
Yeah. So the next page compares 2017 to 2023 for the village. And there's the 23,688. And you immediately might be concerned about the comparison to 2017. And here's what we know. The database for residential and commercial for electric and natural gas was populated by Central Hudson back in 2017. When we were looking at the data back in 2019, when we were doing the inventory, we could see it was being underreported. So that source of data we knew was not high quality. And so that meant we were going to be underreporting our emissions in residential and commercial for both electric and natural gas. The database has since been updated. In fact, they've archived the 2017 data. And if you look at the 2023 data in the central Cluxon database, you see much more complete data. So it really instills more confidence of the bottoms up numbers, so the tops down numbers for the village. But it does show a significant increase in residential commercial, but that's not from usage, that's from the data being artificially low. So I wouldn't make too much out of the comparison here. It is interesting to note on transportation, however, that the vehicle miles traveled did go down for both the village and the town. So in total, what's called VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is down. Coming post-pandemic, you have more people working from home. You have probably a greater use of delivery services. And so we think those may be some of the contributing factors on why vehicle miles is down. The other thing to keep in mind is that electric vehicle transition, it doesn't reduce vehicle miles traveled. It only reduces emissions. So you have probably people driving just as much with their electric vehicles as you do with your gas vehicles. So we're going to continue to see VMT numbers be high, but we pull out the emissions or reduce the emissions based on the percentage of electric vehicles that are registered in the village and town. That's an adjustment that we do in the numbers. So 23,700 metric tons is the village's emissions. If we go to the next page, what we can say is that the commercial is the primary source at 12,700 CO2 equivalent metric tons. And it's natural gas that's driving about 2/3 of that. So 9,400 metric tons of the commercial is attributed to natural gas. Residential is the next largest sector, about 25%. And there it's fuel oil that is still the primary contributor. We have seen movement to heat pumps, and we can see that in the permitting. And so there is that transition is happening, but there's still a lot more to do on conversion. The transportation is a factor, and I've already talked about the fact that, yeah, we are seeing some improvement in vehicle miles traveled, but we're probably not going to see that come down a lot. What we really want to do is get more transition to electric to reduce the emissions. One could argue that the vehicle mile travel is probably not going to go down very much in the future. But what we will have a change in what's being driven, and that's the key thing we need to facilitate. So the conclusions is there's two areas that we should try to focus on. The first would be to do education of the restaurant owners on electric appliances. What can they switch to that would use electric instead of natural gas? And that's always changing. So it's something that needs to be researched and then communicated to the restaurant owners to consider using alternative energy sources. On the residential sector, we are making steady progress on the transition to heat pumps. And so anything that we can do to facilitate that transition is goodness. And accelerating the transition to electric vehicles really by supporting infrastructure. And with the rental properties, getting those properties, particularly new multifamily dwellings, to have EV charging appropriate with the number of parking spaces. And you might say, well, what's appropriate? Well, that's a discussion. How many of the parking spaces should we have charging? If we get to where we ultimately need to get to, it's going to be a high percentage.
Do you mind if I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, you don't know me probably, Mike Bates, I'm the Director of Planning, Zoning and Code Enforcement. And I'm working on updating the village zoning code. And one of the things I've done is brought in requirements for EV charging stations for multifamilies and businesses where people are there for a duration of time. and setting standards for how many based on the number of parking spaces. So
Well,
I was just working on it
That's
today,
great.
interestingly enough.
Here, is that gonna be applicable to just new construction or will it?
Well,
be
no,
existing?
at the moment, with the zoning code, it would only be applicable to new construction, but we could broaden out from it to make it potentially applicable to others too, but
That's a great start.
I'm about to, within the next month, make a presentation to the village board. They don't know this yet, but with this change, but it's,
We do have this.
yeah, they know it, but they didn't know the timing of it. I'll leave it at that, so, but within the next month, I'll have that in a format ready to be.
We can't wait to do like Christmas and all.
I might come and cheer you on.
So what about the public parking spaces? Are there EV charges? I know this one we had outside the village hall for a while. It's not been functional.
Yeah, so ChargePoint is one of my least favorite companies to deal with. We actually lose money working with them. And we've investigated alternatives. We just haven't found something that makes sense. You know, we can't have EV charging stations that are losing money. Or else then we're, you know, effectively giving away, you know, taxpayer owned funds, which is not legal.
So I do think there are now Venmo-based charging stations that are commercially available that would.
Yeah, but
take
if
a
you
good
don't, if you
cost.
don't have the volume of users, you're not meeting your basic connection costs.
Well, yes, your rate would have to be high to accommodate the use of that meter, but you set the rate as part of the Venmo charge.
Sure, but if you don't get any users for an entire day, you did pay money to Central Hudson to have it connected to the distribution system.
Yes.
I can't lose money.
So therein
I'm not
lies,
allowed to.
so therein lies the interesting challenge and question, I think, for really the community as a whole, which is how do you factor in the social?
When is Quick Check and Stewart's gonna be allowed to start selling electricity? Why is it the local government's responsibility? We don't sell
So
other fuel sources,
So I'll
so you
come
can
back.
use your vehicles.
I'll come back to the question of point about why is it that we do government operations first? Because you lead the way, you set the example for everybody else, and then code comes into play to make it happen.
And we've done it, right? We got all the initial grants to allow for the initial penetration of EV. But now someone else has to take the baton.
I'd like somebody beating us. I think it's important that we do set the example for the community. Now, the cost is always there, always present, right? How do we absorb a cost? Is it a budget increase? Is that a tax increase? Do we cut something else? But this is all what goes into the question of to address climate change. What is it that we are prepared to do to contribute to driving down emissions? How far do we think we can go? And is there a cost associated with it? In some cases, there might be a cost.
Yeah, this is a fun nuanced conversation, because I think you're gonna have a hard time defending this idea that non-EV drivers should subsidize EV drivers.
Well, it's effectively already happening, right? Because when they don't buy gas,
Yeah.
when they don't buy gas, they're not contributing any taxes to road improvements. So we actually
Fair point,
have
fair
this
point.
already in today's society.
Yeah,
Okay,
Next slide.
Sharon's gonna,
Can I ask a question? Why is solar panels not an option and heat pumps are?
solar panels are an option, we're putting them on the fire department right now.
Excellent,
Yeah,
excellent,
yeah, the goal is that that's gonna be a net zero building,
good.
so that'll help with it.
Well, 11 metric.
so
You'll take what you can get.
I know that
100,
It's 100 and something.
On this firehouse, I know there's some discussion about the large roof. And the ability to mount solar panels to it. It's probably a lot more load than what the building actually produces. But it could offset
Sure.
your, especially if you enter into a aggregated meter construct. So it could offset the electric at the waste treatment plant, and it's a great roof for solar, assuming we can get beyond the question of mounting the panels. So that might be a way to attack the electric usage at the waste treatment facilities.
Well, the other advantage that we have at our wastewater treatment plant is that we have a fair amount of real estate down there. Unlike like the city of Kingston, everything that they have is like jammed on a teeny little postage stamp. We actually have a decent amount of square footage. So we have some.
So there's possibilities.
Yes, and it's been researched before, but so. Our plan was to start with the fire station, see how that works, and then look at water and sewer.
And the other thing you have to consider is the distribution wire. That you're gonna connect to the electric grid, you need to be close to the.
Right, and that's probably the reason why you're not doing such significant generation, right? Like your goal is to really just end up with like a net zero building, otherwise you're gonna have to update and have
Well, let's
proximity
just,
to a
let's just
transmission.
have other places where you can put solar panels in. And then you could oversize if you have an aggregate meter, and towns and villages are ideal for aggregate metering. Because you can oversize one facility on solar panels, where the other facility should carry solar panels.
But again, you have to be close to a.
Transmission line.
Yeah,
Yeah, even with oversized, we're not talking about, 5 megawatts, we're maybe talking about another, 20, 30, 40, 50 K, so it's not in the range where. It's probably not in the range, you do have to consult with Central Hudson, I mean, it's a necessary step, it's still an interconnection agreement.
Is most of the village, and I don't know the answer, because living in town of Rochester, is most of the village three-phase system? Because like in the rural area where I live, there's only a few areas that are actually three-phase systems, because you have to have a three-phase system to connect back into. So I don't know,
I think that
I'm guessing
not three phase up at the water plant.
Yeah,
I believe that. So let's work towards just like concluding this evening's conversation, because clearly we could go on for days.
You have
Because
a
we have to
question?
start. meeting.
I just had a question about your commercial. What's included is commercial residential, part of that?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Is commercial residential part of your commercial?
Oh, mixed.
Yeah.
So I can't answer, I don't know, because it depends on the meter, right? It depends on what Central Hudson says the meter is, whether it's a commercial meter or a residential meter. And it may be that there's 2 meters there, one is commercial and one is residential. So it depends on the metering. How they classify.
I think they classify multifamily as commercial, I believe, I'm not 100% certain of that. But I believe they do, I think residential is only single family, 2 families. But it could be incorrect in the state.
Yeah, and Yvonne, we have penciled out putting ground mounted solar panels at the water plant, because we have some real estate there too. But we just need to get some money to do it. Originally, we were gonna use some ARPA money from the county, but we're gonna use the rest of that ARPA money from the county for the fire station project, since we had to make it bigger.
maybe found that there's still water plants are far away from the distribution lines and.
Right, but at least
Right now.
we could potentially like buy a battery. I mean, and then
Oh,
you could start
yeah.
too. Do you wanna have a battery proximate to, your drip
Oh, that would
source?
be great, yeah,
You might not, because if you had a fire there, how are you gonna?
true.
So you should come to my presentation on July 17th at the town board meeting, which I'll be giving a presentation from a study group on battery safety.
You wanna put battery next to a drinking water source?
Any place you put a battery if you do have a fire, the groundwater has the potential to pick up toxins, if there were toxins inside in the fire. The 4 fires that took place in 2024, there were no reported toxins by independent agencies. So groundwater is always something to examine, no matter where it is. So the threat is always there. But thus far, with the technology that's being used, they have not found any toxins from the 4 instances. Well,
So no toxins in the battery themselves, only the risk of toxins in whatever you're using to put out the fire.
well, it's water. It's
Just water.
It's water, all they use to put out the fire. And so whatever is burning, right, the question is whatever is burning, are there any toxins in what's burning? Thus far, the answer is, if you look at the technology that's involved, it does not produce any toxins.
Well, I think the other concern too is that, isn't it, that you can't actually put out a battery fire, you just have to let it burn.
You suppress the fire by using water to cool it. So yes, you're not extinguishing the fire, you are preventing it from spreading.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It's continuous.
It's to alleviate your concern, you should come to the presentation on the 17th.
It's very worthwhile.
Keep in mind, California and Texas have a lot of batteries.
I like batteries, I've lived through a crisis where we had a contaminant next to the drinking water.
That's a fair problem to be concerned
Yeah,
about, but
the
not
batteries
just for
somewhere else.
batteries, but
The
for
batteries somewhere.
anything.
Right, last slide.
One more.
This is it. Or is it? Is this the
God, it's the last
last
one.
one?
We go ahead,
No, go one more.
must be it. It's not
That's it.
advancing.
All right. So what we need for tonight is a separate resolution that approves the report. Which is a separate document there. Publish a report to the government webpage and reaffirm that, the village's commitment to emission reduction targets. And the frequency of inventories of no less than every 5 years.
So we can put that on our next agenda, basically accept your report and then we can.
It's actually, I think it's on,
Do we have a resolution?
it's listed under 1C maybe? On the agenda?
Oh, yeah, joint resolution. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I was looking at the piece of paper copy. Yeah, I see it in the electronic.
it's in the new print.
Yes. I move that we adopt a resolution approving the new 2023 community-wide GHG inventory and reduction targets. All in favor? And I move that we adopt this report. All in favor?
The
Thank you.
report post is the inventory report?
Yes,
Okay, just wanted to make sure I had the right one.
Yeah,
And I guess the resolution too, that's public.
I could also see if we could put the presentation up probably on the website too. I'll check with Nicole.
sounds good.
I think the 2017 one is there already.
Yeah, Focus 2023.
Yeah, thanks for all your work on this. It's very valuable discussion.
Sure, thank you.
It's moving in the right direction. Got more work to do.
Yeah.
Well, so it needs a- Yeah, and we also don't have the speaking boxes, which is.
Right. Well, that was the economic argument that the mercury vapor goes out more often and the LEDs should last for
Yeah.
15 years or
I
more.
haven't seen a report in ages.
They happen sometimes, but
Yeah.
not in all the way, Houston.
Are the streetlights, state on? Streetlights, traffic lights,
Owned by the state.
Oh, owned by the state?
yeah.
Yeah, we don't own any traffic lights. You mean the
Traffic
red,
lights.
green, yellow?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
that's all DOT.
Okay. Good to know. And if we can help with anything, let us know.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have a presentation from Dr. E. Walter, the Public Health Director for Ulster County.
Thanks for all.
Is that okay?
Sure, perfect.
Great, very ready.
Okay,
So while I'm finding that, thank you for having me here. So as said, for everyone else, I'm Jean Walter. I'm the Public Health Director in the Department for Ulster County. And I kind of taken it upon myself to travel the county, and introduce myself and introduce the Department of Health, because what I found is, a lot of people don't really know what we do over there. I didn't even, I served as a legislator for many years and was actually the chair of the health committee, and I had no idea the full breadth of what was happening in the Department of Health. So I thought it'd be useful to come here and talk about our programs. And also I have a little slide that specifically talks about what we're doing here in New Paltz, full town and village. So I thought it was interesting to point out that we started in Ulster County in 1947. Our mission is to protect, promote, and improve the health and well-being of all residents in Ulster County and help them achieve the best quality of life in all stages. Go to the next. So we're mandated by the state of Department of Health. If you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, so advance it. What is it you want?
I had the next slide memorized, I just. But that's a big one.
Sorry, Eva, I'm not sure why it's not advanced. It's advanced when I push the tab button.
Here, you wanna use mine?
Yeah, use my phone too.
Okay, I'll start reading it while I figures this out.
Yeah,
So we're dictated by New York State public health law. And there's some core, services that we are required to provide.
I can do it that way.
Can you make each one big?
Yeah, we can try that.
If you just go to display.
Yeah.
Why is she, oh, she has it in. Or you want to start from the beginning and then try moving along? There you go. Okay. This is nice to have anyway. So again, these are all mandated elements. Oh,
Sorry,
that's okay.
not following the normal PowerPoint.
All right, why don't you leave it there for a second?
Here we go. We're good.
Okay, great. So, we are required by state law to, do communicable disease control, which includes activities to control and mitigate the extent of infectious diseases, chronic disease prevention, environmental health, which utilizes legal and regulatory actions to improve and protect public health, family health, public health emergency preparedness, education on public health issues, and development of policies. So I'm going to break down each of our different divisions so you can see how we address each of these things. So the next slide. So, oh, no. So we have several different divisions that make up the Department of Health. We have patient services, health promotion, chronic disease prevention, public health preparedness, environmental health, and then kind of separate and connected slightly. We have the medical examiner's office, which is not an Article 6 required or funded project. This is actually the county fully pays for the medical examiner's office. And then women, infant, and children is its own program, but falls under the Department of Health. So the first one is patient services. So we have public health nurses who conduct regular adult and child immunizations. We have a regular clinic at our health center. We provide most of the immunizations for adult and children. I will say that we are only allowed technically to provide immunizations for individuals who are uninsured or underinsured. However, that said, we did get some doses of measles vaccine from the state to provide to people who could have insurance. So we have like a set of those that if the individual is insured and wants to have a measles vaccine, child or adult, we can provide that, but the rest is generally only for people who are uninsured and underinsured. Underinsured means if your insurance won't pay for this immunization, we'll cover it. We also are starting a home visit for high risk birth. So this is going to the home after the delivery and just checking on the baby and the mom. We have weekly STI clinics and weekly tuberculosis TB clinics as well. It's kind of funny with the thing. I can't tell if I'm missing anything, but I think we're good. All right. Our Women, Infant, and Children, or WIC program, provides nutrition for mothers and children up to age 5. We include SNAP enrollment. We have breastfeeding peer educators, and we do nutritional education. WIC comes to New Paltz the 2nd and 4th I'll look it up, Tuesday or Thursday at the Church of Nazarene. So if you know any moms, new moms who might be low income, and potentially eligible for WIC services, the SNAP is great, but it also, WIC does a lot more where it provides them real information, education. There's an app where they can go to, the supermarket and identify which foods they are allowed to get and what's covered by their benefits. And like I said, we also have a lot of other things to help support either breastfeeding or bottle feeding. All right, next. Our environmental health is a very, very big department, about 24 people. So we protect public water sources and approve water and septic plans for new developments. Just ties into what you were all just talking about. We also ensure safe food preparation, so restaurants and food vendors. We ensure safe children's camps, public pools and beaches, and safe migrant farm worker housing, mobile homes, parks, and temporary residents. So all of this, again, under state regulations, and some county regulations. We are expected to do these inspections, provide permits, deny permits if necessary, to make sure that all of these things are safe and healthy for all of you. Next. In addition, we have a lead poisoning program. So individuals, there's a couple of ways that you get involved with this. One is people can just ask for us to come and test their space. And we have our people will go out there and test it if lead is identified, and we'll work with the homeowner on doing remediation. Also, if a child's lead level is elevated, we get informed immediately and we reach out to the family, and we are at that point we're mandated to stay with the family until the child's level is clear and work with whatever the homeowner is to remediate the lead. We also respond to rabies and insect-related illnesses. So if an individual was bit by an animal and believes that they are concerned about whether they need the rabies vaccine, they usually go to the hospital, they contact us. If we deem that it is appropriate to be vaccinated, then the Department of Health covers those costs, which is a pretty expensive thing. People come to us about when their ticks a lot. We're not allowed to, we have no mechanism of telling whether a person has tick-borne illness, but we do assess, we can work with the person on how long the tick is there, what type of tick, we can identify it. We can test the tick itself. That doesn't necessarily mean that the person has whatever the tick has, but we do have that. And we also regulate illegal tobacco and vape sales. Illegal tobacco sales are sales to minors, and then vape sales to minors, but also all flavored vapes. So our people go into the different retailers any given time and check. And we do have some bad players here in New Paltz that we regularly identify are selling the illegal flavored vapes. With the illegal tobacco sales, we have actually a young person who goes with our team. Well, the team stays outside and that person goes in and tries to buy cigarettes. And if the person sells it to them, then we issue a subpoena, a fine. Okay, next. We do health promotion and chronic disease prevention. We have a Heart Healthy Coalition. We also have a healthy Ulster County. We do media education awareness, radio, billboards, buses, presentations at fairs, events, and schools. So we have several different initiatives. Right now, we have the campaign is called Movement is Medicine. And so you may have seen it on some of on the buses. So this is focused on healthy at every size, which is kind of an anti-obesity, which is a very ineffective approach, is to focus on obesity. We focus instead on healthy at every size. So we have that. The next one coming up is going to be on lead prevention, and then we have a jewel one, and so we kind of rotate those out. We come to events all over the county at the Ulster County Fair this year. We're gonna have a couple of different things. One is about heat vulnerability, and we have cooling towels to present to people, give out to people. But we also have nurses who are gonna be there doing blood pressure reading. Anyone who has an elevated level, we're gonna send them home with their own blood pressure monitor. We also have, I'm excited that we just well, I didn't complete anything, but we partnered with Ryan Cronin, so if you see the Expect the Biker signs that are all over, Expect a Walker, so he's created one for us called We Are Public Health, that kind of has a dual meaning. One is to introduce people to what we're doing, so we're gonna have those signs around the county in places that represent what we're doing, so we'll have one by the septic system perhaps, or by a fire hydrant, or in front of a restaurant, just to show where we are, but also it has that meaning that we are public health, like we can bring the immunizations to the county, but people have to come to us and take them. So we are all in this together as a group, and so that's kind of an exciting new one that we have coming out. We have the public health preparedness. So we are working in partnership with emergency response, but from a public health perspective. So looking at both, what are we going to do next time? Should there be a next time that there's an emerging disease, one in which there is no vaccine, or a vaccine preventable disease? So we're creating these game plans for exactly what we're going to do in each of those situations. And from a public health perspective, emergency management knows, well, they're not really about the vaccines, but they have their role. We are partnering with our role. So same with weather related events. So for example, if there's a flood with a power outage, emergency management might be showing up to make sure that the roads are okay, that people are safe. But then we also have to go and see if any of the water is impacted. But maybe if people lose power and they are on insulin, which needs to be refrigerated, then how are we going to make sure that their medications are preserved so that if they can't have power in the house? So focusing it from a public health perspective. We are excited to start working with towns and villages on making their community centers potential preparedness zones, meaning, you know, not necessarily needing to be a polling center at the fullest level, but what are the basic things that you should have in your community center, you know, whether it broke down to an AED, but also maybe some blood pressure monitors, and what kind of refrigeration, and what kind of, just so that should you ever need to bring everybody into your community center and we bring our nurses there or whoever, then it has some basic supplies. There is some funding that's out there to help municipalities, especially when they call rural, which means basically not the big cities, to set up their community centers, also including greening and using geothermal so that the whole community center is not impacted by these events. So we really want to work with different communities on helping them retrofit their community centers or whatever location. It could even be a space like this. Next. Then we have our medical examiner's office, which investigates any death that may affect the public interest, such as a sudden, unexpected, or unexplained death. And so they go to the scene, and then we perform autopsies. We have a forensic pathologist, who's our chief medical examiner, who does these autopsies. Next. All right, so meal calls, what are we doing for you? So right now, we inspect and make sure that the food is healthy in 86 restaurants and 2 mobile food units. In terms of children camps, temporary residents, we permit 1 summer camp at Lenape, 3 temporary residences, 1 campground, and 6 swimming pools. We have 3 migrant farm housing locations, 10 water systems, which included municipalities, schools, daycares, and apartments, and 11 residential septic systems. So this is what we are doing right now here in New Paltz. So just in terms of strengthening our impact as we go forward, this is kind of our goals, or, you know, my focus as we started this job about 7 months ago, and we've been setting this in place. So one is improving public trust. A lot, ever since COVID, there has been during COVID, there's been a decline in trust in public health. It's really important that our community trusts us, because next time anything happens, and we're issuing suggestions, we need them to really understand that we have their backs. Improving awareness of our programs, which is a part of trust. Part of trust is knowing what we're actually doing every day in this community, but also being aware so that you can know to come to us if you need to. Not everybody realizes the services we have. We also are looking to identify and meet unmet needs. We are currently doing a very large scale community health assessment that looks at hospitalizations, death records, various other health, primary care records to really understand like what's going on in our community within the different zip codes, what's causing people unnecessarily to go to the hospital, and so that we can set an agenda for what else we need to do. I will say that I encourage any community to let me know if you feel there's something that needs to be addressed that's not being addressed. And we can figure out if there's a way that we can look at it. And then the last big one is to really be prepared to protect our county's health. So having whatever it needs to be in place now, so that should something significant happen in the future, we're really, really as ready as we can possibly be. And if you have any, that's it for, unless you have any questions for me.
I have just a couple. You mentioned tick testing.
Yes.
Do you know which diseases, is it just Lyme? Or is
No, it checks for all of them, for the ticks.
it free?
It is. I will say that, it needs to be understood with a grain of salt when it's presented to the public, because one, just because the tick shows up with something doesn't mean that the person has it. And sometimes people, that can cause an unnecessary sense. So we really focus on guiding people on how to symptom check themselves, and identify the right time to go for prophylactic if they probably need it. But yeah, we will test the ticks.
And what's the turnaround time from
Good question. It's pretty quick.
a couple of days?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know of any funding sources for AEDs? Because we don't have one. We used to have.
So what we've done is we've kind of, let us know, because we're kind of doing that bulk thing. So we got a special price to get large amounts of them. We're also working with people from the sheriff's office and emergency management to do free AED training and CPR training. So if you're interested in that, you should let me know too. But just contact me and I'll connect you with Ben to talk about how to get it, at least the low price AED.
Joe, you had a question? You want to come up just so we can record it, or I can repeat it?
So given that climate change is gonna be with us,
It
I was
is.
wondering if you're considering tracking air quality
Yes.
events from wildfires.
Yes.
Also extreme temperature events. And then lastly, I would say, I don't think batteries are going away. And so the concern over battery fires or fires in general, anything that releases toxins, right? The tracking of toxin releases from any house.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Those would be three things that I think from either preparedness or environmental protection to consider.
100%. So so emergency management, got, because right now we have two or three air quality monitors in Ulster County that's feeding and telling our story. So emergency management purchased air quality monitors so that one could go in every single municipality. So the idea is that first we'd get them in each municipality, and if you haven't been reached out to about it, I can, make sure. I believe Dennis Doyle at this point is part of distributing them. But we have one for every municipality. So point first is to get a quality monitor everywhere, because we're not going to just rely on 2-3 municipalities telling our story. From a Department of Health perspective, once those are in place, I'm going to ingest those data into a system that allows individuals to put elements about themselves. So they can put their age, they can put whether they have respiratory conditions, the zip code, and it will pull the air quality information and the influenza rate information in there and guide them on what they should do that very day, given the situation. Or you could put it in for your child if you want to, and it'll guide them on, do you need to mask? Do you need to actually stay inside? If you're an outside worker, whether you should avoid that. So the first step is to get those monitors everywhere so that we actually can get a granular reading at every zip code, but that's definitely happening.
So we would be responsible for,
No,
So we just.
You would just partner with them on where it goes and getting it set
Is
up.
there any maintenance required?
I think whatever it is would be handled by the county. I think it's just situating them.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not given to you so much, but you're offering
We're
space to
just
put in
hosting
there.
them. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So just reach out to Dennis.
I believe from my last conversation with Everett, Dennis has taken over that part of it, but you can also reach out to me and I can do some research on who's distributing them.
I had a question about the lead poisoning stuff. Has the DOH been involved at all in like the EPA requirements where municipalities are supposed to identify whether there's lead in water service lines?
In the workings of the pipings and the.
So
soldering.
like the service line is like this weird no man's land. It's like before the meter, but after the main.
Yeah,
And it's below grade, so it's hard to determine, you know, because we're regularly not in people's yards. I don't actually
So in
believe that there are service lines made of lead in our community for a variety of reasons, but the EPA has mandated that we determine whether or not they're there.
I do, I mean, it's interesting, so going into residential units, because
So we
like
go with
schools are easy, because
Yeah.
schools it's
But
required.
we,
to take
we've gone into
schools.
residential units a lot recently because we've replaced a lot of meters. So when our staff is there, they're confirming that there's no lead in the basement where the meter is being attached. So
Right.
that's a good box to check off.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because our regulatory is your system, but not necessarily people's residential homes. We get involved again, like if it's something like a school, but not even really, like if a school's level is identified as high, the state loops us in, because it's the state, not us. In terms of individual water, I mean, I think we would come in, should an issue be identified. Then
It's just a
we work
very
with Spelman.
weird federal program. It's like the definition of an unfunded mandate because like, how are we supposed to know without digging someone's yard up?
Right,
And we also have a strong, but like, we know where we have lead.
I
in
mean,
our
short of
system.
testing their water first, how you just,
We,
where
te-
it's coming from,
we test the water on
Yeah.
a regular basis, it
Yeah.
doesn't have lead,
yeah,
but they want us to
that's interesting.
100% confirm that the service line is not lead. We don't own the service line, the property owner owns the service line.
Hmm.
But that's not exactly the case in every single municipality
Right.
either, so sometimes municipality owns the service line.
Right, yeah, as to your point, I mean, not to say like. Obviously, the heart goes beyond the regulations, but that our regulations are your structure and not necessarily that either. So I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I know that there have been situations that came up, like Kingston had some situations that came up and we're kind of looped in. I mean, it'd probably be worth talking to Steve Noble about how they kind of are addressing it there because, it became people's awareness, but yeah, I don't know, I mean, we have the same thing with like PFASs and other things like that, it's like. If it's identified anywhere, you're mostly focused on the wells and the systems of the municipality. We can't really do much within the homes. Chances are most of the PFASs are coming from those homes, like washing their, waterproof jackets and everything like that. But that we were very limited on what we can do in a residential home. We could put up guidance, we could make suggestions, but we're really stuck to focusing in on the system that we're regulating.
I mean, I'm wondering whether this program is gonna kind of like fade away with the new federal administration. Which I don't think is a good thing either, because it's
possible.
it's a flawed program, but
Yeah, I
But
mean,
the
even
next
our,
time-
even our interior and exterior lead programs are being threatened on a federal level, so it's quite possible.
okay,
Yeah,
if we hear more about it, I'll compare notes
Yeah.
with you.
yeah,
And then most of the time, those are picked up in the children because the pediatricians are mandated to test the kids at your different periods of development.
any lead level, yeah, that's one of our programs, so if a kid has an elevated level, we're told immediately, and then that child is, our nurses work with the parents, but also our lead techs go into the homes, identify the sources, work with the owners. And, you know, there's things like if you want to ask us to come test your space, there's no mandate, right? If we come and test your space and we find lead, mandate kicks in. Now we have to do something, and you have to do something. And so, different, if a child's level is elevated, mandate kicks in. We have to do something, and the homeowner has to do something. It's interesting, they're starting a lead registry program where they're starting first in the zip code, the Kingston-based zip code, but basically any unit that has more than 2 dwellings and is built before 1980, we're required to just go in on every single one of those and test them. And that's kicking off next year. But we have a great lead educator and nurses who are skilled in it. So anytime anyone has any questions about at least lead from a health place, we have the people who can talk to it. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good idea to make sure we're aware of what dealers does.
Yes.
This makes sense. So let's continue. So on this business agenda, we have local law to update our design review board. Mike, do you want to summarize?
So the board is aware, but for the public, the design review board is made up of the same individuals as the Historic Preservation Commission, but they have a slightly different function in that they're augmenting the zoning code and the planning board's review, in that they're making recommendations and reviewing mostly commercial properties, very rarely residential, but mostly commercial properties in certain areas of the village, to just be certain that what we're getting is harmonious with the rest of the structure and architecture. They review new signs, things like that. And they were appointed a while ago by resolution, and the village attorney and I both felt like it would be better to actually identify them in code as having an official role, because it is different than historic preservation. So we drafted a law that went through various incarnations, and it's to the point of the board to adopt it tonight. It would officially designate the group of people as the design review board, in addition to being the Historic Preservation Commission. And what that allows too is, in future, they could be separated into 2 different groups if we chose to, but for the moment, we're gonna borrow those people's expertise and let them do both roles. So that's it in a nutshell. But there's a resolution that I wrote to adopt the law that's in your packet.
Okay.
So
Right, so we have the law itself in a final form as an attachment in this agenda, and we have a resolution. I move that we adopt the resolution. To second by Bill, all in favor? Aye. Next item, well, thanks
thank you.
for shepherding this through.
Yeah, no problem.
Next item is the annexation petition regarding the proposed New Paltz Apartments. That's the property that's contiguous with the SUNY New Paltz property, just south of the SUNY New Paltz property. And we have the petition from the applicant. We also have meeting minutes from the June 15th joint public hearing with the town and village board. And then there's the full transcript from that meeting, including public comments. And then we have the comments that were received subsequent to that meeting, because the public hearing was open for written submissions for an additional 10 days. I'd like to move that we ask our village attorney to compose a draft resolution to approve the annexation. Does someone want to second it for discussion?
Second.
Any comments, questions about?
Reading.
Right, so, we were all at the public hearing. I think what's important to highlight is, this relates to their request for annexation. lot of the heavy lifting regarding the project would be done by the planning board during the site plan review. And then prior to this, a lot of the heavy lifting regarding the project is all manipulated within the secret process as it is the type 1 action. So all in favor of asking Will to draft a resolution to approve annexation from because both the village board and the town board have to act individually. So in terms of whether or not we're green lighting annexation.
And you have 90 days from the close of the public hearing to act one way or the other.
So all in favor?
Aye.
And then the next item, Yvonne and Joe, you guys got me thinking about this agenda item. So it's a request for a letter of support as UCRA is going to apply for a climate smart communities grant, and it's related to a composting initiative. And so one of the time, I compost at home. I wholeheartedly believe that, removing compostable materials from the waste stream is really important for a variety of reasons. But this is basically a program that will empower and help us identify solutions for like people living in apartments or just, it's like a multi-phase approach to, dealing with facilitating more composting. But I think what is interesting, and it made me think about this when you guys were talking, is about how composting is a very important green initiative, but you can actually get it wrong if, like, let's say you're doing composting locally, and then your plan is to drive the compost like entirely too far away. So like all of the benefits of composting, you're kind of cannibalizing by then using all this fuel to drive the compost away. So I think part of one of the things that they want to do is like, the highest and best composting practice is to do it on your own if you can. And if you can't, how do we identify ways where it can be collected locally and then brought somewhere that's not too far away to end up with composting? So I just was appreciative of their kind of like, more fully thought out approach to how do we do composting, but then also do it in a sustainable way. So it's just a letter of support, saying that we're in favor of them receiving the grant award if they're so lucky. All in favor? So you seconded my motion to sign the letter of support. We're discussing. You had a question, Yvonne?
So they are looking at improving their composting at the recycle center.
Not so much at the recycling center. I mean, I think like the example that they were talking about and kind of like a near-term phase 1 is like in Kingston, I believe they have some sort of like sheds in certain locations that like, if you're a community member, you can bring your compost there. And then so it's not necessarily at the transfer station.
Oh, okay. Because they do have a setup where you can bring your composting there.
Right, so I think part of what they're doing is like every community, we have 23 towns and villages in one city in Ulster County, and we're all doing things a little bit differently. Some of us are at different points within the, the composting continuum. Some are further along than others. So I think the idea is that, looking at what each one of us are doing individually, looking at what is realistic for any of us to accomplish. Like, maybe there is an ideal site in the village where we could put these sheds, where we could, give community members access to the shed. But it's, it's not like someone then is driving to Clearwater. That would probably be a pretty significant barrier to getting enough participation.
There is a compost bin in front of the community center.
And also at the, Reformed Church.
Yep, and community compost, the private entity, like, they have a composting operation and they use the library. You know, so there's lots of things going on, and I think what they're looking to do is to maybe connect some of these dots.
I can add to that a little bit. I also sit on the UCRA Board of Directors. I just recently joined 2 months ago. What we're trying to do is identify compostable material before it gets into the solid waste stream. So we can sort of separate it sooner. And because we do have a very good composting program at the Kingston UCRA location. We've been waiting for the DEC to approve a permit to expand that for quite some time, and we keep waiting, and hopefully they will soon, which would, I don't want to say for certain it's going to double our capacity, but it's going to significantly increase our capacity for what the amount we're allowed to compost. But our goal is to, at the local levels, try to get it sort of separated sooner before it gets to us to reduce the amount of solid waste. So it's just one of the many ideas that we're exploring to lessen the overall impact of solid waste.
Okay, all in favor of sending the support letter?
Second.
Did you have a follow-up, Yvonne?
Just that, we're thinking about initiating a grant for the recycling center here. Don't know exactly how we're gonna get it from the community to the recycling center. Right now, the community is bringing compostable material to the recycling center and they're separating it out. But they also need to, they just got new equipment so they can compost the material quicker.
When you're saying the recycling center, are you talking about the New Paltz one or the UCRA's?
The new
center?
parts.
Okay.
The UC
They're
The
one-
UCRA has a facility there.
Right.
Yeah.
So they have some equipment that they're trying to build up their composting capability. You're aware of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think
Just
what,
like this could be able to apply for a grant, we're trying to get various, to write a letter of support that we can include in our grant.
yeah, and I think again, it's kind of like an educational initiative, and then maybe like a warehousing of like what all the different communities are doing, and like where can we fill in gaps, like, you know, New Paltz is probably further ahead with some of this stuff and has been, so I think
Because
that's,
there's a company that goes around to residents in New Paltz also.
yeah, community compost, right, and then, so, but the challenge with community compost though is like, they're driving their material a more significant distance. And that, you know, makes sense for maybe certain customers, but, you know, it's like, how do we end up with more properties and businesses participating? Like, that's what I think UCRA is trying to do by being like an umbrella organization.
Correct.
So all in favor? Aye. The next item is related to the CCA renewable energy supply contract through Hudson Valley Community Power. So that's gonna end at the end of June, unfortunately. You know, disappointed to see that our CCA administrator just is finding it too difficult to navigate New York State law. I think at some point we we're a little bit optimistic that the Public Service Commission was gonna update how CCAs work. Unfortunately, that did not happen. So what is going on in our community is that we're getting letters from Central Hudson saying that, you know, your energy supply is gonna go back to Central Hudson as the default. So if you do nothing, that's what will happen. People continue to have the option to go ahead and find their own ESCO. So like, there's a letter here that provides a link to ESCO options. And then also there's another link in terms of the solar, you know, through the Hudson Valley community power program that's through NextAmp. So that's another alternative, you know, separate from CCA. That's what people often confuse, is how CCAs and the community solar projects work. But then there's also another letter that's going out into the community right now from Direct Energy, because they were the ESCO that RCCA had contracted with. And I think that they're suggesting, or someone was suggesting that us as local government then encourage people to go with direct energy, which I find to be problematic because, you know, there is a law, it's a CCA law that allows us to basically direct customers towards an ESCO. But I think as local government, we should not be in the business of recommending ESCOs. We can certainly say you should investigate whether an ESCO makes sense for yourself and do the research, but, you know, just the same way, you know, our building department doesn't suggest which plumber you hire either, you know, that would not be, permissible. So that's really just an update. Item number 7, so we have a grant award to update some sewer mains on Church Street, Harrington, North Front, and worse. And the plan is to have contractors bid starting on July 1st, and then the bids would be open on July 30th by 2 p.m. that Wednesday and read aloud, and then we'll select a.
July 30th or 29th, it's the agenda.
Yeah, I took it from the actual document
Okay,
itself,
so
where
30th.
I wrote July 30th. If we could just double check that, that
Yeah.
would probably be worth it, but so. We're encouraging the contractor community, and you know, we generally have about 8 to 10 contractors bid on these projects. But you know, this will be another pretty significant project that we'll bid on, so we can update even more of our sewer conveyance system. So I'd like to move that we go ahead and make the bid documents public. All in favor? Aye. Next item is a resolution so that we're officially actively participating in the county's hazard mitigation.
You
plan.
missed number 8.
I'm doing them right now. Okay, I'm looking at
Yeah,
the paper copy.
the water sewer.
Let me just do this one. Let me finish this one.
Okay,
So
sorry.
I'll come back to that. So I move that we go ahead and greenlight the resolution to participate in Ulster County's hazard mitigation plan.
Second.
All in favor? Next item is a memo from our treasurer's office and DPW staff. So we got a request from a property owner who was looking for water and sewer reduction because they had a leaky toilet. So we generally have a formula if it's determined by our public works department that you ended up using less sewer. For instance, if it was like a pipe that was outdoors, like a hose, you know, that water is not going into the sewer system. But when you have a leaky toilet, that water is 100% going into the sewer system. And there's no mechanism whatsoever for us to not charge you for the water that went through your meter. That would be problematic and a violation of state law, right? This is a collectively owned system. You know, this is not like a for-profit entity where we can take, you know, some assets and offset. There's no profit being made by anyone. So you basically be taking money that's collectively owned by your neighbors to help, you know, offset water and sewer consumption used by another, which is not allowable. The only thing that we can do is we can offer property owners payment plan. So if they have a larger than expected bill, we can offer them the ability to pay that bill through the rest of the fiscal year, and that sometimes is worthwhile in terms of at least spreading out the expense. But we can't not charge for the water that was consumed.
Do you need to do a resolution on that?
Yeah, well, I think first we need a request
Okay,
from a request or proposal in terms of how and if that payment plan is needed, but we don't have details on that. So we were basically just asked to officially respond to a request for a water and sewer bill deduction,
got it.
which has been our practice for the entire time that that I've been involved, we don't do. Unfortunately, and I understand it's super frustrating, like this happens to people, it has happened to me. You end up with a leaky toilet, you get a bill that's higher than expected. And sometimes, even if you know it's a leaky toilet, you can't necessarily fix it as quickly as you would like.
Case for the new meters.
Yeah, the new meters are super helpful because they flag when you have a leak going on, whereas before we had the meters, the only flag that you had was when you get your quarterly bill. So no action there. I'm gonna move on to the resolution to authorize our submission to the Environmental Facilities Corp. WIA program, so that's the same grant program that we've applied to in the past to update water mains within the system. You know, historically, we've had a great deal of success securing grant money for sewer, a lot less success for securing grant money for drinking water conveyance. But we try every single time there's an opportunity. And this will just be another one of those times that we will apply and hope that our grant award is successful. So right now, you can go on North Chestnut Street and see our friends from Goshen, New York, the TAM contractors. They are replacing the largest section of water main our community has ever updated. It's a 1.3 mile section from Sunset Ridge to Southside. That costs $3.9 million. And a chunk of that is being paid for by a WIA grant award we received in fall 2019. I move bills and claims.
Second.
All in favor? And that's for agenda items 11 and 12. You want to share any PB liaison update?
Yeah, we met on June 17th, but I think the highlight for us is a review of an application for the Ann Oliver House. We want to put in a new porch roof and a couple of other exterior considerations. Also, there's discussion about where people are going to park once the cultural center is put into place.
Where are they going to park?
Yeah, exactly. That's the question. So, yeah, and there were other things that came up, but that was sort of preliminary proposal on it.
There's street parking on Church Street, there's street parking on
The board,
Memorial Park, there's street.
the board suggested they explore the idea for events of using other parking, like maybe the Jewish Center's parking or other, locations that they actually negotiated an agreement to allow that to happen. But for when there's large events, the normal day-to-day activity, the size of the space only requires 2 parking spaces. Which is achieved by the street, but when there's an event.
Parking is, it's like we have, what? Sewer plant Ps and then that other P is parking, like those are the municipal Ps.
They also suggested looking at, Zero Place and any of the other.
I mean, a lot of this parking fixation just.
Yeah.
Confuses me because I think of like when Water Street Market would show like Dirty Dancing or Jaws, there'd be like 200 people watching the movie. And this fear of like, where are they gonna park? I don't know, they parked somewhere and they enjoyed the movie. And the Water Street Market did not fall off into the river. Like we have this crazy fixation with parking all the time.
Plenty of parking.
There's parking, yeah, people figure it out.
Yep.
Or they walk.
The other thing is the 147, 149, 151 North Chestnut project received its site plan inspection.
Any liaison, or any of the CBA, update?
They didn't meet,
They didn't,
they had
okay,
no agenda.
great. Anything else that our board needs to talk about? Motion to adjourn,
Second.
all in favor?